so this encounter won't be like the others posted, because you could say I invited this on myself, and I would tend to agree with you. This might be a long story, I'm sorry in advance. I probably won't go back and cut it down, I'm incapable and long-winded. Just on the edge of rural Maryland, my friend and I went to an infamous mental asylum that had been shut down because of abuse since the 70s, to explore and take pictures. We arrived around dusk, because that is when the sun casted the longest shadows and everything appears to dart at the corners of your eyes. We crept into the parameter and approached the first building that seemed accessible. It seemed to be an old dormitory, but it was pure menacing in the shadows. It was dead quiet and getting darker by the second while we tried to gain entry. All the windows on the bottom floor were securely boarded up, but on the top floor, they were not. We climbed up on a shed, and we were able to knock the top half of the window so that it slid down. What's important is that only the top half was open. The rest of it remained locked tight. It was a really tight fit for us as we crammed ourselves in. When we were in, we put our respirators on, avoiding toxic particles as much as we could, and started poking around. It was super creepy. The rooms had bed frames and chipped dressers, and even various personal papers lying around. As I was happily jaunting, my friend had ventured downstairs. He ran up to me after he had been gone for only a second and said, "I think someone's living here." I dreaded this, but had definitely come across homeless people before, so I went with him to check it out. Sure enough, on the stairs, maybe a month or two of accumulated human feces. Thank God I had my respirator on. As we got down the first flight, we looked down to the second flight and to the pitch blackness that was on the first floor. My friend looked incredibly tense because he apparently had heard shuffling feet when he came to get me. "Hello? Anyone live here?" I shouted. I've been through this drill before. "We're not the police, we're just looking around. Just holler if you would like us to leave your home." We were met with dead silence, and we both stood there anticipating very nervously a voice on the other end. When there was nothing, I picked up my high-powered flashlight to shine it into the entryway room. Right as I flicked the switch, we heard an unmistakable noise of a man shifting his weight and running across the room, knocking over what sounded to be plastic bottles as he ran. Fuck no, my friend and I didn't need to see it with our own eyes, but we both turned and trailed and bolted, but I peered back as I rounded the corner and caught a glimpse of a very crazy-eyed, filthy gentleman about my size, 6'2", 190 pounds. I ran as fast as I could without tripping. We went into the room we entered from, the only way out. I closed the door that led to the hallway behind me and stood there with a board I had picked up. No way did I want to fight a crazed homeless dude, but my body was in fight or flight mode, and I couldn't flee through the small window gate without exposing myself to a crazy homeless murderer. I stood there with my weight against the door while my buddy tried to widen the window gap. I could hear the man pacing outside. He sounded some distance away from the door, but he was unmistakably walking back and forth. Each time he got near, you could actually hear his fast breathing. I didn't even bother trying to explain again that we weren't the cops. I just barricaded the door with my weight. After a bit, we had to make do, and so I slipped through the window gap as quickly as I could. Not very quickly. Well, he watched my back, and then he followed, a lot more quickly, being a smaller Asian man. After we got out, we told our friends, a pack of girls, about the encounter, then told them we intended to keep exploring. Eventually, we got picked up by security guards, not extremely long after we informed them we had a squatter, and that he might be violent. And when I said that, their faces didn't look too happy. A couple of years ago, I flew home to visit family. I'd be there for about a week, then we'd head over to the coast for a week, then back home for another week. I totally needed this break. I had just ended an on-again, off-again relationship. Like seriously, one day on, the next off. It took 7 months of putting up with it, because you're supposed to fight for what is important to you, right? Anyhow, I finally said it was done. No more chances. No trying to work it out. Just done. So with that chapter of my life being over, I was more than happy to be somewhere else, surrounded by family, and then putting myself back together. Well, I got there, spent a couple of days sleeping a lot. My mother's a nurse, and she was becoming concerned that there was something physically wrong with me. I just needed a couple of days in a safe place where I could just let my brain work on digesting the new life I would have when I got back home. So before I left for the coast, I met up with a friend from grade school that I kept in contact with over the years. I thought it would just be he and I, but it didn't really faze me that another person was there. We hung out for a while, and then I needed to go back home because I had to take a backwoods rural route to get home, or taking a different route that would take another 20 miles to get onto my track. Being backwoods, I needed to be able to keep an eye out for deer, so I said goodbye and told S.A. that if he was ever in my neck of woods, look me up and we'd grab a drink and hang out. I told him to grab my number for my friend, and out the door I went. After being halfway home, I got this weird queasy feeling in the pit of my stomach, so I slowed way down to be sure enough. There was a deer in the middle of the road. Because I had slowed down, I could see another car out on the road. I couldn't shake the queasy feeling, so I figured it would be better to cut off and go down the main road because there were more places to stop. I seriously didn't want to stop in some rural farmer's driveway. I watched too many movies to make that mistake. So I get over to the main road and pull into a gas station and sit there for a couple of minutes, trying not to get sick to my stomach. I ran into the store, grabbed some water and ginger ale, and came back out to my vehicle, still unable to shake that queasy feeling. So I started to head home from the gas station, and I knew I didn't want to go straight home, so I drove around, taking this road or that road, until that weird feeling started to go away. Then I went home, read for a bit, and then went to sleep. Next day, everything was fine, and we headed off to the coast. Fast forward 2 weeks, trip is over. I'm still feeling a little fragile over the breakup, but that's all. I figured I would begin the process of cleansing the environment of negative energies and then work through my baggage that came about the breakup. I knew that there was a lot and that it would take time. So the next day I'm going about my business and everything is cool as can be when picking through the junk left behind after a breakup. I'm really doing just mindless things to zone out and not have to think too much about the activity since my brain was working full time already. A little bit later in the day, my phone rings. I don't get a lot of calls, so I assumed that it might be a family emergency and I needed to answer it ASAP. The area code of the caller, who is not in my contacts, is the same as my cousin, so I answered it without a second thought. On the other end was S.A., the acquaintance, the person I had met at my friend's house. It was a little weird of him to be calling me, but I'm not thinking it's anything terribly out of the ordinary. I asked him what was up, and he said he was at the airport. I still find it a little odd, but I said, "Oh, that's cool, where are you going?" He said that he had already landed. Again, I'm distracted, and really just want to get off the phone so I could go back to my mental sidestep and zone out while my brain chugged away. So, I said that I hoped he had a good time wherever he was. He then said he needed me to pick him up. "What? Did you say you needed me to pick you up?" "Yeah," he replied. "I came to visit you." I paused for a second. I know for a fact I didn't show any more interest in him than general courtesy. Even the tossed over the shoulder, look me up comment was one of those polite things to say because you never actually plan on seeing them again. Unpause. "Why did you come to visit me?" I asked. He said he felt a deep connection and wanted to be with me. I'm starting to get angry as well as freaked out at this point. I told him I didn't feel a connection at all, and I couldn't believe that he would fly across the country to see someone that he spent maybe 2 hours with. He said that I invited him when I said to look me up. I said, no, that's just a polite thing that you say to some random person that made a very small impression on you. He then said he needed to find a way back since I misled him. Misled him? What the fuck? Me telling him to look me up if you're ever in the neck of the woods had led him to think that was a basis of any sort of encounter that was meaningful. He said he needed a place to stay until he could get money for a plane ticket back. I said that there were more than enough hotels that he could stay at while he got himself sorted out. He told me he didn't have any money after buying the random one-way plane ticket. So, at this stage, I'm flabbergasted, angry, and freaked out that someone would do that on a one-way ticket. I finally caved and said he could stay the night with me while I sorted shit out, but I expected him to be gone later than the morning of the day after tomorrow. So I bring him back to my place, throw pillows and a blanket on the couch, and turn to head to my bedroom, and he asks if he can sleep with me. I'm like, no, actually no fucking way that is going to happen. So I point out that I have firearms, and I tell him not even to attempt to come in. The next day, I have work, so I woke him up and told him to find a way home immediately. I also told him that I had work, but would check in on his progress, because the next morning, I was dropping him off at departures, regardless of whether he had a way back or not. I went to work and he blew up my phone all day. He wanted me to come back home for lunch. I told him no, I'm way too busy. I finally get home from work and I'm chuckling at a text that I got about my dog, and that's when I noticed that he rearranged everything. And by everything, I mean every room of the house had been rearranged. I flipped my lid. I asked him why he thought it was normal to do anything like that. Instead of answering, he asked me who I had been talking to. I said it really wasn't any of his business, but I had received a text from the guy watching my dog while I was on vacation. Color me shocked when he says he doesn't want me to talk to that guy. I'm no longer freaked out, fully about to have a full force disaster unleashed on this guy and leave nothing but a smoking crater. The temperature drops to about 10 degrees and I very calmly said to get his shit, and I was calling a cab to take him to the airport because he's a fucking psycho. Side note, full rage has been achieved when it feels like the temperature drops and I speak fairly calmly. If I'm complaining about something, it's a quick burn. If I go into monotone calm and tilt my head to one side slightly, that is where I hit Arctic level anger. So he, unaware of the environmental change that has occurred and that the chances of survival are dropping by the second, decides to tell me that he used my computer and got my ex's phone number, and they both agreed that I was just heartless. We were fast approaching the epic scale disaster, and he finally seems to notice how deep into rage I had sunk. I told him that it was unlikely that he had gotten onto my computer, because the password to my computer was a full quote of a part of the art of war. I told him that he had 3 minutes to get his stuff and get out, or I wouldn't be responsible for what would occur. So, still yelling insults at me, he gathers his stuff and leaves. I used to get calls and texts from him, but I'd block one, and then 6 more would pop up, but it eventually stopped. To this day, I have no idea, nor interest in knowing where he's at or if he made it back. It's a crazy dude who would hop on a plane with a one-way ticket based on a random polite comment. Let's not meet again. Up until my junior year of high school, I mostly flew under the social radar and stuck to my status as a nerd girl, but when I was 15, I joined varsity cheerleading. My school's cheerleaders weren't popular by definition, but everyone kinda knew who we were, because we were on the announcements, performed at pep rallies, and generally engaged with students a lot. I made a lot of friends that year, and some of them happened to be the cool kids. For a while, I thought this was my payoff, my long-awaited karma of years of bullying I'd suffer from their hands. I even started to develop a crush on one of them, a crush which the junior cheer captain herself volunteered to help me pursue. Homecoming was a big deal where I'm from. I began to fantasize about my crush asking me to go with him. I heard rumors he was planning a dramatic proposal, and as homecoming season approached, I became more and more sure I'd be his date. The junior cheer captain, who was close with him, kept dropping hints that I was right. One day at practice, she asked me what my favorite candy was, and I knew it would be so my crush would know what to give me. You can imagine my surprise when, after an exhausting theater rehearsal, I walked into the parking lot, was confronted by some guy I'd hardly spoken to asking me to be his date. My theater friends all applaud, assuming I was overjoyed. I saw both my parents in the parking lot recording the whole surprise. But, most importantly, the cool kids I'd recently befriended were standing right there behind him, egging him on. I didn't understand why, because he wasn't popular at all. In fact, he was known to be kinda creepy. The junior cheer captain was laughing, encouraging him to give me the box of my favorite candy he was holding. She definitely orchestrated the whole thing. I didn't really know the guy, but I didn't want to humiliate him in front of one of the coolest kids in school, so I faked a smile and rolled with it. I promised myself I'd deny him later, in private, so he wouldn't be embarrassed. Afterwards, my parents excitedly asked me how I felt about the ordeal. I explained how uncomfortable it made me. I said that I got a strong creepy vibe from the guy. That didn't fly with my parents. My mother accused me of having expectations too high. My father demanded to know, not for the first time, if I was secretly lesbian. I never had a boyfriend or shown much interest in dating. To make his case stronger, I just became best friends with the only openly gay girl in our school. Long story short, I knew that I had to shut down my date. I'd effectively declare war on my parents. However, I played my dad's protective instinct against him and persuaded him to let me friendzone my date. After all, he knows how high school boys think, right? I texted my date that night and explained that I only saw us as friends, but would still be happy to go to homecoming with him. He was very polite about it, although I could tell he was interested in me romantically. It seemed we reached a deal until the next day at school, when one of my cheerleading friends referred to my date as my boyfriend. I corrected her and told her we were just going to homecoming as friends. She seemed confused and told me my date was telling everyone and anyone who could listen that I was his girlfriend. A few more of my friends approached me with similar comments, and I confronted my date about them. He denied all involvement and suggested it was just a rumor. I reminded him that I was just friends and had zero romantic interest in him. He said he understood. I got a call from the junior cheer captain. She pretended to be sweet and conspiratorial, but I was still annoyed that she led me to believe my crush would ask me to homecoming. She began her attempt to persuade me that I was wrong to friendzone my date. She said that she spent many afternoons planning his proposal with him, and she knew he was kinda creepy from afar, but he was a sweet and caring guy underneath all that. I said if he was such a catch, she should go on a date with him. Now annoyed with me, she dropped the sweet act. She told me that I had to date him because he liked me so much, and he'd gone through so much trouble to ask me to homecoming. I had to give him a chance because he'd gone out for a limb for me. I told her she was wrong, and I didn't have to do anything I didn't want to do, and I owed him nothing. I ended up hanging up on her soon after that, but that was just the beginning. Starting the next Monday, he would corner me in the hallway and give me a rose that he held in his teeth. He usually did so between my 6th and 7th periods, so when my path through the hall was crossed with his, I was deeply uncomfortable with this and told him so, but he wouldn't stop. I took different routes to escape him, but the junior cheer captain and her gang made a point of tracking me down so he could find me elsewhere. Every time he did this, everyone in the area would treat it as a sweet romantic gesture, despite my obvious discomfort. Wouldn't any girl be lucky to have a boy so devoted to her that he gave her a rose every day? He was still telling everyone that I was his girlfriend too. The final straw for me was when he walked into a class he wasn't in to find me and give me my daily rose. My teacher, who was friends with the junior cheer captain, just let this happen. For weeks afterwards, she would ask me about my date every day. When he came in, I told him to get out and leave me alone. His feelings were clearly hurt, and he left looking like a kicked puppy. My classmates started calling me a cold hard bitch. It didn't matter what I had to say about him. I was an ice queen, refusing the sweet boy's advances. Everyone in the school had decided that I was in love with him, and nobody cared what I had to say about it. My crush, who's a part of the popular group, joined the junior cheer captain in pressuring me into returning my date's feelings. At every event where the cheerleaders were present, my date would push his way to the front of the crowd. He would get to great lengths to get my attention. At football games, he would wave a flag in the students section so I'd look at him when we were cheering. The other girls would make comments on how endearing he was when he waited in the parking lot by our bus back to the school just to give me a hug and tell me how great I did. I didn't know what else to do than let this happen. I had only recently ascended to the position of visibility. If I conflicted too hard with the cool kids, they were so dead set on setting me up with this guy, I could be an outsider all over again. I hoped that if I kept ranting to my real friends about how creepy he was, and publicly let him do what he wanted, it would all blow over. My school had a 15-second attention span, so some scandal had to one-up me sooner or later. The truth emerged, as usual, in the locker room. It turns out the junior cheer captain had been telling him, during their afternoon together, that I was into him. He'd come to her for help, announcing his crush on me, and she'd gone a step further and convinced him I felt the same, despite the fact that I didn't even know his name. She'd lie for him for weeks prior to the homecoming proposal, and when I told her that she was wrong, she didn't care. She told me that I should be grateful because everybody was starting to think that I was gay. My best friend, the lesbian one who was starting a gay revolution, and I, inspired, spread a rumor that we were dating. After all, everybody already thought I was gay, right? But my date wasn't fazed. In fact, he told everyone that he just turned me straight again. Ew. 3 weeks after he had asked me, it was finally homecoming night. Thanks to cheer obligations and a complete coincidence involving a Switch backpack that left me without my dress, I ended up only attending the dance for a half hour. My date awkwardly stood at the side of the room while I danced my heart out to Mr. Brightside. I almost felt bad for him. Right at the end, the junior cheer captain appeared like a summoned demon to suggest we slow dance at the next opportunity. Thank God I escaped that one by walking to the DJ and suggesting he play Footloose. My date walked me out to the parking lot to wait for my mom to pick me up. While we waited for her to drive around, which took entirely too long because she still hoped I'd stop making a fuss and date him, he asked me out. I politely declined. He quickly stammered that we could go with a group of people, like the junior cheer captain and my crush. I denied him again and made it clear we were only friends, and I wasn't interested in romantic endeavors because I was just too busy. That was actually true. I was in all advanced classes, varsity theater, and cheer, and worked a part-time job. A few days later, a teacher eloped to Vegas, and nobody cared about my love life anymore. My date and I were distant again by classes and activities and work. It appeared that everything was going back to normal. That Friday at the football game, my crush asked me to sit on his shoulders for the kind of romantic thing that they do at my school during the football games. It's hard to explain. Overjoyed, I accepted, and I hoped this was the beginning of a new chapter for me. I ignored the frantically waving flag in the stands. Monday came around, and my date stood on a chair in a second period class and announced that everybody should be wary of my crush because he would steal your girl. I heard everyone buzzing about it a few hours later when someone called me a bitch again for breaking my date's heart. I knew I was being dramatic, but I decided not to go to lunch that day, terrified of running into him. I'm so glad that I didn't. Later, I saw on Snapchat that my date had carved my name in his arm with a pair of scissors. His bleeding arm was screenshotted and sent to me by half a dozen people, most of them demanding why I'd hurt him like this. He did it in the middle of the lunch in a crowded cafeteria, and somehow no administration noticed or cared. The school was buzzing. My date was a broken-hearted victim, and I was an evil, secretly gay bitch who wouldn't give him a chance. I got so many dirty looks. By fifth period, I was ready just to walk out. By my good girl instincts kicked in, and I decided to tough it out for 2 more hours. Around that time, I got a panicked text from one of my cheer friends. Well, she'd initially been insistent that I date the creepy guy. She apparently changed her mind after lunch and the incident that happened. She told me that my date, who was in her 5th period class, was going off the rails. He had started out by saying he wanted to kill himself because I wouldn't love him. This had escalated to saying that he'd kill my crush for lying to me and stealing me away. Finally, he'd started talking about how he knew where I lived. My parents had given him my address when he initially wanted to ask me to the dance at my house, and he would make me pay for wronging him. I knew that after 6th period, our paths through the hall would cross. Since the beginning of this ordeal, the school had cracked down on students getting outside, and my alternate route to escape him was no longer an option. My class at the far end of the hall was nowhere to go but into the central hub, and he would be coming from the other end of the hallway towards mine. I was stuck up a chimney, basically. Desperate, I texted the junior cheer captain to finish what she started and tell him that I was not and had never been interested in him. She'd made this mess, and I would make sure she had to clean it up. She said she'd go to the counselor, but she didn't know what else to do. This was way beyond her control now. For the first and only time, I skipped class. I hid out in the theater hall and waited for 7th period. I got a few texts during the passing period that my date was waiting for me by the bathrooms. There was a little alcove right there where you can't see people coming around the corner, and the thought of him hiding there and waiting for me to walk by alone horrified me. Right before 7th period began, a few of my classmates burst in, cackling and proclaimed that my date was coming down here after school to kill my crush. They thought it was hilarious, but judging by the look on my crush's face, this wasn't a joke to him anymore. Our teacher brushed this off as typical theater drama, pun fully intended. I watched the clock and tried not to cry, knowing that by the time the bell rang, my date would be outside, waiting for me and my crush to emerge. That day ended up being a work day, so my crush and I were able to escape the classroom and hide out elsewhere in the theater hall to get away from him. He opted for the black box theater, and I went for the lighting closet. Obviously, I didn't witness what happened, but my best friend filled me in afterwards. Allegedly, my date turned up 3 minutes before the bell rang and stood outside the classroom where we couldn't see him. And when we opened the door, he told everybody staying around that he was ready and had a knife with me to kill my crush. We don't know if he actually had a knife or not, but the idea that he might was enough to terrify me. His arm was wrapped in paper towels that he was bleeding through. My best friend told him my crush and I were gone, but he didn't believe her. He stood outside for 25 minutes until the administrators started walking through to make sure no one was at the school who shouldn't be. My date was in a theater, so he wasn't allowed to stick around. That night, I texted him that not only would I never date him, but I could no longer even see a friendship between us. I sent him a number to a suicide hotline and told him to get help. Finally, I told him he needed to learn what no meant, and I never wanted to speak to him again. He responded that he was sorry and asked if there was anything he could do to fix this. I told him no. I still don't think he learned the meaning of the word after all, because the same pattern repeated itself a few months later on Valentine's Day. The next year at homecoming, senior year Valentine's Day, and prom, but those are all other stories. I've since graduated and went off to college, hundreds of miles away from him. My family back home moved from the address my parents gave him. Contrary to popular belief, I'm not gay. My crush, on the other hand, came out a few months later, and we were friends for the rest of high school. I'm working on handling romantic endeavors in a healthy way, but he had got to my head. He was the first person to ever show interest in me. Ironically, the last time I saw him was my first and only homecoming game after graduating, but this time, I had true friends to defend me when he predictably tried to pull some weird stuff with me. The worst part, looking back, was somehow being at fault for everything. To this day, people from my high school reference the whole ordeal as the time you wouldn't date that poor shy kid. I can't even appreciate red roses anymore. So homecoming date from hell, let's never meet again.